We're up. My name is Chris Jarvis. Welcome to this session where we're going to have a great conversation. I'm just working on sharing my screen, True Allies for Inclusive Change. I'm going to introduce myself, introduce my colleague, Jake McIsaac, in a second here. But before I do, a couple of guidelines for this session that I don't know if it was shared with you in other sessions or not, but we are giving away a free iPad. I'm lying. And this is coming from the Northern California Grantmakers Association. They're going to give a free iPad, I'm lying, to anybody who puts on the video and uses the chat. Okay, so the person who puts on the video and uses the chat the most can win a free fake iPad that's not happening. Okay, so it's not real. I'm lying. Judy, so far, Judy is going to win the iPad. She's the only person on video. She's phenomenal. She's got great beams in her house. So it's not a fake background, right, Judy? It's the real deal you got going on there. She's like, are you talking to me, Judy?
Are you talking to me?
There you go. Totally.
I thought there might be more than one Judy. I didn't want to be presumptuous.
You're the original Judy. And how do you say your last name?
Coach.
Coach.
K-O-C-H.
Okay.
So
great. So Judy's related to the Koch brothers. No, okay.
Not the Koch brothers.
It's funny. I couldn't say that before you were like, not that.
Well, you know, there's been a time when I wish I were related, but I'm not. Most of the time, not.
Awesome. Allison, how you doing? Great to see you. Good to have you on the
so good to see you.
Today.
Thank you. This is like you and the music are
yes.
And I just hope everyone here is doing real well. Take really good care. Thanks for having us. Thanks for being here.
Perfect. So let's follow Allison and Judy's lead along with Colleen. Sorry, Colleen, I said it wrong. And joining us with video, because one of the coolest things about Zoom or whatever, I know we're not in person, we're not hanging out, we're not drinking wine afterwards, you know, eating shrimp and talking about everybody else at the conference and which session we liked and didn't like and that kind of thing. But this is as close as we get. And honestly, I'm really lonely. I've been in this house for a long time by myself. I don't even get out. So if you wouldn't mind turning on your video, if you can, if it's a no pants day, totally understand. No video, that's fine. You're allowed to have those. But if you can turn on your video, please do it. Kathy, you? All right, awesome. Kathy's awesome. Yeah, follow her lead. That's great. Now, if you don't want to do that, you can put in the chat box your name, the organization you're with, and where you're calling in from. That would be phenomenal. So just let's take a second, type in your name, the organization you're with, where you're calling in from. We're going to follow Rodrigo's example. It's perfect. With Carnival, San Francisco, perfect. And Sarah's already set us up for a successful chat here with some guidelines. She's with Northern California Grantmakers Association, so that's great. Rodrigo, great to see you, great background, love it, that's fantastic. Yeah, so here we go. We're gonna have a great conversation in the next, well, now it's not 45 minutes, I've eaten up about 8 minutes of our time. Let me introduce myself. Who the heck is talking to you right now? Lindsay, thank you for coming on. Love the background, but obviously you're in an office with your mask on. My name is Chris Jarvis. I am with Realize Worth. We work with companies on their employee giving and volunteering programs. If you want to know more about me and the work we do with the RW Institute, it is all in the notes. I'm not going to bore you with it or take the time right now because you didn't come to learn more about me. You came to learn more about the content. We're going to get right to that. Let me introduce Jake McIsaac. Jake, if you want to take a few seconds and say who you are and what you do.
Hi, folks. My name's Jake. I'm calling in from Halifax, Nova Scotia, the territorial land of the Mi'kmaq people. So we call this area Mi'kmaqi. I work as the Assistant Director of Campus Security at a university on the East Coast. And what we do is we're trying to use equity, diversity, and inclusive principles in reimagining public safety and reimagining what it takes to shift to anti-oppressive approaches to keeping people safe. And so it's from that basis and a whole bunch of different conversations that Chris and I wanted to present some of these things to you today. Thank you.
Perfect. And Jake's background also includes working with a province like the state of Nova Scotia in Canada on restorative justice, extensive background, obviously that we can't get to you right now, but he's got incredible insights, and we're both really glad to be here and to share. So let me just say, Lindsay, Ola, Claire, Kathy, Colleen, Julia, Judy, Kathleen, Logan, Allison, Monica, thank you so much for taking the time to just share with the rest of us a little bit more about who you are. I know we can get it in the app and whatnot, but this feels like human to do this somehow. So I really appreciate that. I'm in Baltimore. I'm calling in from Baltimore. Jake's calling in from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Halifax, Nova Scotia is where? First question in the chat box. Remember, there is a free iPad coming from the Northern California Grantmakers Association online if you participate in these little questionnaires. So Halifax, Nova Scotia is where in Canada? It's where I'm from as well. Not many people know it.
Claire says somewhere up north, very north. So not
very north,
not
very
wrong,
north.
Not wrong.
Anybody else? Claire, could you like not the North Pole? Feels like it does sometimes. Gallery view. Eastern Canada. Courtney, you're right. Go a little further, Courtney. Dive in. It's a gorgeous place on the east. Allison, have you been there, Allison? You have? When were you there?
2 hours.
I really want to, I could talk about this for, okay, I'll be really quick. I took the train across Canada for 3 weeks a few years back, and it was
wow.
Excellent things I've ever done, and I've thought about it a lot in the last year and a half because
amazing.
Oh man, it was amazing. I highly recommend it to anyone as it's gets safe and whatnot. Like, absolutely excellent thing to do.
I've never even done that, and I'm Canadian. I live in Baltimore, Maryland, and I love it here. And we're really excited to be with you at this online conference. Okay, let's dive in. We're going to be talking about true allies for inclusive change. We're going to examine a little bit of the concept of allyship. I think we all know the term. It's been used: performative ally, real ally, true ally, ally to women, ally to other groups. So what does it mean for the workplace of the future to be an ally? And we're going to investigate this with a bit of a scientific angle. What happens in the brain? And there are some really important things that need to happen in our brain in order for us to be an ally in the real world. We can't just think our way to it sort of at a philosophical level. There's some fundamental things that need to happen. And we're going to explore all of that today. The thing that's going to make it most interesting for Jake and I to be here with you is if you participate by being on video, which is great. Now, Rodrigo just checked out. He's like, I got to get a sandwich, whatever. That's fine. If you got to come and go, totally cool. But in the chat, we're looking for 3 things. Number 1, a question, obviously. If you have a question about anything, we're going to be watching the chat. I'm going to reach out to Sarah every once in a while and ask her if there's something we missed in the chat. But if you've got a question, put it in the chat. If you've got a contribution, so Colleen might be sitting there thinking, oh my God, I know more about this than they do. That is awesome. I would like to get smarter at this, please. And so would Jake. So share the link, share the resource, share the insight, make a contribution. That's number 2. Number 3, contradiction. My lived experience is not yours. Jake's is not yours, and all of ours are not each other's. So a contradiction is just a different way of seeing it that can, again, make us better, smarter, quicker, faster. Now I'm talking about the $6 million man, but make add the contribution as well. You see it differently. You have a lived experience. It's a little bit differently. That makes this session really interesting. So please add that as well. Okay. Question, contribution, contradiction. Okay. All right. Here we go. I'm going to hand it over to Jake. We're going to begin with this.
So the first time I walked into the Sunday supper, I was overwhelmed. I wasn't prepared for what I was going to experience. It was noisy. There were about 250 people crammed into a church gymnasium for a meal. Now, I had been to feeding programs before. But most of those had been divided up by social location or nexus of need. So there were programs for homeless men or women and children or street-involved youth with addiction. And so it all kind of made sense when I went to these different places, but the Sunday suppers felt different. There wasn't a lot of pretense to the Sunday supper. There was no lining up for food. It was one meal once a week. Homelessness and hunger were not going to be solved on Sunday nights. But what could happen there is children were running around. There were all sorts of folks in this community meal. It felt very much, probably, we just came through Canadian Thanksgiving last weekend, felt very similar to what happens at my house when everyone gets together. It gets really noisy. Everyone's talking. Everyone's excited. The kids are running around the living room and you've lost track. Is that my brother's kid or my sister's kid? Like, whose kid is that? And that's the neighbor's kid. And it felt like that. And then people would bring their pets and on the side was a generous helping, not of dessert, but of dignity. There was a overwhelming sense to this Sunday supper that I had not ever experienced before. And so when I came to help this one day, I started to get shifted in my thinking, and it started to change over time, my coming to the Sunday suppers, who I am.
My experience was pretty much the same when I walked in. Sunday suppers have been going on for 15 years. And it was this, as Jake said, this one meal in this church auditorium, about 150 people would come. But before, they would be playing a basketball game, the young guys. And I walked in and I locked eyes with a couple of the guys and they locked eyes with me. And we both knew the same thing. One, I didn't belong there, meaning I didn't really share any of the attributes of the folks who were coming together. And I was new. And two, they knew it. And so it felt weird. And for me, this was the beginning of my understanding that when you volunteer, we're not all at the same stage. And what we're going to do in this conversation is sort of set up the journey of the volunteer as a way to understand and really compare and contrast the journey that we all take in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, in terms of being a true ally. So let me explain this, and then we'll dive into that with a bit more detail, the allyship, and then we're going to tie it to the workplace. So that's the goal. So the first stage in the journey of a volunteer, Sunday suppers, we had, as Jake said, about 150 people who were affected by poverty, mental illness, addiction, whatnot. And we went out, Jake and I both went out into the community, and we found volunteers wherever we could scrape them together. I'm curious to know if anybody on the call, so again, for the free fake iPad, if you want to put your, if you can just share with us, anybody who's been to a community meal or a soup kitchen or anything along these lines, focused on communities, and the opening session was all about homelessness in the Bay Area, focused on that community, people who don't have enough food, maybe not shelter, affected by poverty, affected by mental illness, affected by addiction. If you've had that experience, please share that with the rest of us, just the name of the organization or where it was and when it was, while I share the rest of the story. So you have something to do while I'm talking. What we discovered by looking at ourselves, right, Jake, and also by working with the volunteers that we were bringing into the situation, is that some of them were coming in pretty knowledgeable, and some of them were coming in like me with a sense of, I do not know what's going on. I do not understand what homelessness is. I do not understand what real hunger is, not like these folks. And so you can break down the journey to volunteer. And the work that we do with Realize Work with companies setting up their employee giving and volunteering programs, we work with Apple, Walmart, Target, Abbott Labs, SAP, DHL in Germany, all over the world, these large companies. And this framework is played out exactly the same in all of these situations. The first stage is a lot like, when I remember, Jake, have you ever been to San Francisco, the Bay Area? I actually don't know the answer to this question. It's not a fake question. I don't think so, right? No. I asked at the beginning of the call if he had been on Highway 1, but I didn't ask specifically if he'd been in San Francisco. So when you show up at the San Francisco for the first time, you go to where? The downtown area where the tourists are. You go to the tourist places, you see the tourist shows, you take the tourist tours. Why? Well, because you're a tourist, you're there for the first time, you don't know what's going on. And for Canadians, I have to tell you, the thing about being a tourist in San Francisco, there's a bit of shock at the weather, because we think when we come from up north to down south, it's going to be 80 degrees. In San Francisco, somehow you have worked out a weather system that does not comply to our norms, and it is cold and it is wet and there is fog, like fog that rivals that of Nova Scotia, which is on the edge of the world on the Atlantic. Somehow San Francisco with this now you go over to Oakland, it's totally different. It's what we would have expected. Canadians should be going to Oakland, but we all go to San Francisco. Why do we go anywhere? We go because we're casually curious. The first stage is very much an extrinsic motivation. When I volunteer for with a company for the first time, I'm casually curious. When people came to the Sunday suppers for the first time, somebody invited them. They didn't have a vested interest in the issue of hunger or poverty. And so they can be new or infrequent. They will be, as I said, extrinsically motivated. They have competing priorities, which means that situational level of motivation, it's very easy for something else to be more important and then they don't show up. They are interested in straightforward, immediately rewarding tasks. I came to make a difference. I want to do something. And they will participate again if they have a good experience. So that's 70% of people involved in employee volunteering. And again, the reason we're talking about this is because that's the work that I do. And this framework came out of the work that Jacob and I did at the Sunday Suppers, is to understand how do we meet people at their highest level of contribution. And so at this first stage, you're very much like a tourist when you're volunteering because you're extrinsically motivated and you have no previous experience. That's where we all start. That's just how the world works. But if I like San Francisco and I can get over the microclimate issues because I know how to go across the bridge to Oakland to get out of it every once in a while, or going to go down south to San Jose or Cupertino or whatnot, I kind of dig it. I like the vibe. I like the foodie scene. I like what's going on. I like the kind of laid back, but very productive mindset. And so the entrepreneurial spirit of the city. And so I may start coming back because now I'm intrinsically motivated. I found reasons to kind of go deeper. And this is, we call this the traveler, somebody who consistently comes back to the experience over a period of time because they're in a place of meaningful discovery. These folks are ready to own the experience for themselves. They're ready to kind of talk about it, take a leadership role. And if they're not engaged at a higher level, they may express boredom. So the third stage, so travelers are about 25% of employee volunteering programs. The third stage is about 5%. And these folks are guides, intentional alignment. You've already heard in the sessions yesterday, folks who expressed this complete intentional alignment between their identity and the work that they're doing. That's a guide. That's somebody who's lined up to a thing. It could be cats and dogs, it could be climate change, it could be whatever, it could be homelessness. But this is what their life is about, as much as their family, as much as the types of clothes that they buy and the food that they like. This is kind of an expression of who they are. And like I said, about 5% of people who participate in employee volunteering programs are going to be at that guide level. So this is our framework to just sort of understand this, because we're going to reference this as we talk about allyship and the workforce, the workplace of tomorrow, and in terms of diversity and inclusion, just to understand that there are stages that we go through as we have new experiences, and this is normal. We apply it to volunteering, can be applied to any sort of new life stage. You move from this extrinsic, I'm curious, to a deeper level of investment. And if you continue on in the journey, and not everybody does, and not everybody has to, you can find that intentional alignment and you can anchor in and say, this is what I am about.
So as Chris laid it out, from the first time I walked into the Sunday suppers to the time we were going out to recruit volunteers to come back and join in the effort and to join into the community and work together, we were going on our own journey. And so when I walked in a tourist, there eventually came a time where we were taking on roles and we were taking on pieces of the work to try and make this experience better or different, and helping. We saw the value and how much it was having an impact on us. We wanted other people to see that. We wanted other people to join the community. So we were guides. We started to think about this tourist to guide pathway as an avenue toward allyship. And so we use the guides as another word for allyship in this context. For us, allyship, and you'll read on the screen a statement, it's probably best rooted in experience. So I work on a university campus. Post lockdown now, things are coming back and there's more students on campus. Everything I hear about is student experience. I hear that matters a lot, that we have to make sure students have a good experience. When I take my car in for service, 2 days later, I'm going to get an email. How was it? Tell us how we did. They want to know my experience. If I go and I am looking at resumes for a new job, for a new hire, we're looking for education and experience. And so experience starts to frame up in a really important way allyship opportunities. And it's a bit obtuse, so I'll sort of bring it home a little bit. If experience matters this much, then lived experience has to matter too. So lived experience is the way that people navigate the world, and how, what they see, what they encounter. This right here, if you can see this, this is your brain. Well, this is my fist, but imagine it was your brain. This is your prefrontal cortex. This back here, that occipital region in the back of your head, but right under here in the base near the stem, two really cool parts of the brain that actually matter a lot about experience. The amygdala and the hippocampus. This amygdala is this processor. Like when I need to figure out, is this safe or is it scary? Should I be fearful? Should I fight or flight? Do you hear those kind of things? This part of your brain is active and trying to figure out, navigate, is this a safe situation? We're hardwired to this. In order to determine which to do, stay or go, it reaches to the hippocampus to grab experiences. Now, this is the life hack, right? This is how we hack our brains. We don't get angry at yourself. We're all pre-wired this way to go with these experiences that are safe. We like safe, and so we're going to stay safe. Experience starts to matter a lot. And so how do we hack it? Is we start to fill the hippocampus with different types of experiences. My dog does this. I mean, we don't really like to talk about it in really primal ways, but this is exactly what happens all the way through the pandemic, because I had a lot of Amazon deliveries coming, as most people did who are working from home, and the Amazon truck shows up in a long driveway and it's really not well kept. So they park at the bottom and have to walk up the driveway. And my dog just sits there trying to read, is it their favorite driver or not? The truck looks the same, stands on the top of the deck, and really looks intimidating and scary. Stiff body, and he just is sniffing the air for something familiar. Is this the human I have to bark at, or is this the one that comes with a treat for dad and a milk bone for me? And the minute he gets that scent and there's something familiar, the whole body starts to shake and change. Familiarity, affinity, and similarity. These are markers of how we recognize in-group, how we start to recognize a natural bias, who we feel safest with. And so in reading all of these kind of in-group, out-group, there's an important characteristic that we have to pay attention to, that if I'm an in-group and I'm volunteering with my out-group, what are the avenues for allyship with marginalized communities? What are the ways that I can pay attention to their lived experiences and actively dismantle the barriers to them? I'll give you one example, because one of the words in this slide is privilege, and it's always a very uncomfortable word. People sometimes when Chris and I are doing this, if we're doing this in person, this is where you can start to see people shift in their seats, the cameras are on, and you can start to see people get uncomfortable, because we start to think about privilege in two ways: white privilege and male privilege. And there's been lots of conversations about that. And a couple of years ago, my friend was talking to me and he said, can I introduce something to you differently that might help you understand privilege with a slightly different perspective? He asked me this question. He said, when you go on all-inclusive vacations, you go with your partner, do you ever go out and go to Cuba and walk around and not have to worry about whether it was safe to love the person you love, whether you could hold hands with your partner, you walk down the street, whether you're going to get harassed, whether you have to pretend to be, that was your partner, or is that your girlfriend, your wife? Did you have to pretend any of that, or pretend you're a roommate? I said, no. He goes, well, I can't not think about that. When I travel with my husband, I have to make sure it's safe for me to go. We have to then think about the circumstances. Is it okay for us to actually show up and be present? He said, that is your privilege. It's all the stuff you never have to think about. And it's the stuff that happens to us that we can't ever not think of. And so when we think about the places and spaces we have privilege, where are the opportunities for us to make a difference for those marginalized communities? When we're talking about allyship, we really want to focus in group, out group, privilege. We do this journey individually, and then all of a sudden we start to get together and think, well, let's do it collectively. You want to make a difference, right? You want to show up and you start to go through this journey of becoming a guide. You've gone in, you're traveling around, and it can be messy. You get lost, you bumble around a bit. And here's the thing, people are going to call you out. You're going to say, I didn't mean to do that. And it's mostly going to be true. There's clumsiness sometimes to allyship, and we have to own when we get feedback from the group we are trying to help. Now, there's a clue. If you're trying to help, you may have to go back to the drawing board and think about the strategy. But lots of people get into it for the right reasons and then stop and completely stall their efforts the minute they get feedback from the group they're trying to ally to and say, hey, you're doing it wrong. And we could give you lots of experiences and examples. We don't have time to do that today, but there are lots of examples. And what we would say is, as you're trying to ally to a group and you get some pushback, number one, listen to it. Mm-hmm. Don't be defensive. Listen to it, believe that lived experience, and try to do better.
Yeah, and so listen, this is me. This is my journey. I'm 52-year-old white guy standing on the shoulders of tons of privilege of the white evangelical men who went before me, Christian men who went before me. So this has been an interesting journey for me, and we're going to get into why can't we just make the switch in just a second here. But I do want to call out my great appreciation for everybody who's commenting and dialoguing and sharing, contributing, asking questions in the chat box. That's very cool. How many people have seen the whether or not you use Benevity as a platform at your company to help facilitate corporate giving and volunteering grant making? They produced a report just a little while ago that showed the sort of the delta between what employees want or see and what leadership says or does. And I'm not going to go through all these stats, but there is still this difference between being able to stand up at a company and say, we want to be an ally. We want to do more around diversity, equity, inclusion. We're willing to do this work. And what employees actually feel like's happening. And this divide kind of comes down to what we're going to get into next, which is you can't mandate diversity, inclusion, or equity. You cannot set up a list of checkboxes and say, are you acting in a more diverse, equity, and inclusive way? We can look for indicators that show whether behavior's playing out that way. But we can't tell people they should do it any more than we can tell people, you need to be more fit. Start that tomorrow. You need to be more nice, more polite. I mean, that's not how human beings work. So what we want to do is we want to dive into when and why does performative allyship occur. Let me just comment on this, and then we're going to dive into how to move beyond performative allyship, which is kind of a place that we all start, which is virtue signaling. Like, I agree with this. I don't know what else to do. I think Black Lives Do Matter. I'm going to send a tweet. But there's so much more that can be done. And when companies set up space with the understanding of what human beings are actually going to go through, the painful, fearful process that people are going to go through when their identity is challenged to the core, that's the way forward beyond anything else that we're already doing. So here's why we all kind of begin at a performative ally, and I certainly did. We are consistently working to maintain a sense of self-identity and belonging, meaning I need some congruence. I need some stability in my identity. So when the first time somebody came to me and said, you probably have some racist biases, I thought, what? I'm a Nazi? Like, I mean, that's where you go, right? Like that's what I feel like I'm being challenged with. Performative allyship and virtue signaling is much like a message of support without any real work. So when we so that's why I said, we can start saying Black Lives Matter, wear a t-shirt, wear a headband, do whatever, walk in a march. But unless we then afterwards go back and start to do the internal work, and this is where the painfulness comes from, we will just sort of arrest in our development. And there's some more interesting information here. We won't go on into it. I'm sure actually the kind of folks who are on this call, knowing a number of you, you would all understand this already. But the question then becomes, how do we become a true ally? That's the real question. So Jake's going to walk us through something called the learning matrix, and then we're going to tie that into how our neural net works. Because if you remember a few minutes ago, we talked about your and my vision of the world. Our worldview is reflected in the physicality of our brain, how it's connected together. To see the world differently, we need to change those connections, and that's where we're going to get to. But let's take a look at this first.
So some will recognize this as Lewis Robinson's work from, and it's been shifted many times since its inception, but essentially there's an arc to skill mastery, right? Toward getting better at something, performance over time. And if you were learning the piano, this makes a lot of sense. If you were learning a new sport or starting to compete at high levels, you work toward building your competence level of that skill. When we think about allyship particularly, there's some work to do as well, or at least developing in the competence, your competency around equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that beautiful first stage of I don't know what I don't know is one of those spaces that is where many people find themselves, and it, to Chris's point, is arrested development. You're blissfully unaware. Life is pretty good. Your experiences aren't challenged. I'm here. I don't have to really bump up and confront the fact that I don't know what I don't know. And so I just stay here. This is where we'll start to see people, you'll hear these excuses, but I didn't mean to, and it's probably true. I didn't mean to say that. You're taking that the wrong way. That was never my intention. And so this unconscious incompetence place can be quite harmful, but the learning for the person who's stuck here is saying you're learning about impact. Your intention actually doesn't matter. You can be well-intended and still be off the mark, harmful. And this is, again, around your allyship. You have to listen. Once you listen, we start to move up to that conscious incompetence. Well, now I know. This is a really uncomfortable space because now I know that I don't know. I know that I'm not very good at it. This is the hard work of pushing through here. You're going to have to learn. And so if you know that you're being harmful, the easiest thing to do, and Chris will talk a little bit more about your brain, is again to say, I'm going to resist change. I'm going to resist doing the hard thing, which is learning something new, steadying up, going through this uncomfortable place, because we will just say, well, I don't want to hurt people. I get that I'm hurting people and maybe it's harmful. So better I do nothing. And we don't want you to stop there. So we just keep going, and you keep going toward, what are you learning? Where are you going? What experiences are you filling the bank with? Where are you volunteering? What podcasts are you listening to? What books are you reading? How do we start to develop some competency? And you're thinking about it. You're actively having conversations. Chris will talk in a few minutes about rational discourse. You're checking in with other people. Who's your community, your thought community? So we do these through podcasts. We do these through a whole bunch of different ways, but you've got to put in work, put in effort. And then, like a beautiful trap door at the top, you get to the top, you think you've arrived, and you drop right to the bottom again, because you realize that there is no stage. Now, this works for some things. There is no skilled stage in this work. This is where this whole diagram starts to break down, because we believe it's much more circular. And you can be at different stages for different things. And so whether we're talking about an allyship to those folks who are most affected by poverty and marginalization, street involved, addiction, the folks who were part of our community to Sunday supper, we might feel really good about where we are on this conscious competence learning matrix. But maybe on the issue of Indigenous justice strategies or decolonization efforts, well, I might not be at a stage 3. Maybe I'm still at a stage 1. And so you can be at different places and spaces on this matrix.
Which brings us to the pain that I talked to it. Growing new synaptic pathways actually causes pain. I don't know. I was surprised to learn this too. So learning is hard because your brain is signaling and then a certain kind of pain. Your brain is trying to be very, very conservative in its energy and its output of energy. And so growing new pathways is difficult. But so as we go through the unconscious incompetence stage, we usually people, in particular, let's talk about me, 50-year-old white guy. Here's my first thing. Chris, I think you may have some underlying racist tendencies. Nope, I have Jake's my friend. That's denial, right? That's no, that doesn't count. You still probably have those things going on. Then I go to fear. Oh my God, is that true? Am I a bad person? Now my identity is challenged. It's falling apart. That is a very scary option. And then you go down to anger and resistance. No, you know what the problem is? You're the problem. I don't have a problem. And then you go all the way down until you hit acceptance. It's a bit like the stages of loss, where you go through anger, negotiation, sorrow, that kind of thing. And then as you move to this conscious incompetence, where you become very aware of what you're not good at, and you move to conscious competence, you can think about it, you can make it happen. You start to test out ideas, and you start to relearn, and you start to integrate and assume the new identity. And this is the connection for us with employee volunteering. When we take people out into experiences like the Sunday suppers with their out group and challenge them in a safe space, in a non-confrontational way, but invite them through curiosity to say, what do you think about equity? What do you think about homelessness? What is your role in homelessness? All of a sudden, they're gonna go through this journey, but if it's done well enough on a regular basis, we can actually get to a place where we trigger neuroplasticity, which is this diagram. You have a disorienting dilemma. Mine was, wait, I have a Black friend, how can I be racist? I am not lying. That's as simplistic and dumb as I was, but that's where I began my journey. You work around to critical reflection. Wait a minute, is it true? Am I doing this? I use guys a lot in my language. I use male gender terminology a lot. I had a lot of questions about pronouns when I first started. Is this an encumbrance? Is this really helpful? Is this the way to go? And you begin to reflect on your experience. And this is where acetylcholine is secreted in your brain along the lines of what Jacob shared earlier, and then your brain can grow new synaptic pathways. It happens really quickly. But the more you revisit those experiences through things like rational dialogue, which Jacob just mentioned as well, it strengthens the pathway. Like when you walk across the lawn the first time, there's just some grass pushed down. But if you do it every single day, 3 times a day for 6 months, you have got a hard path. You may come along later and even pave it or put down gravel. That's how neural pathway, synaptic pathway growth happens. It doesn't happen by thinking it into existence. We can't think ourselves into being fit, right? You can't learn about nutrition and learn about weightlifting and think, I'm good, I'll be fit. And the more I read, the more fitter I'll be. That's not how life works. It's not how our brain works. And so once you have the rational dialogue and you kind of come up with these new ways of thinking, you test them. You go to committed action, you test them again. Employee volunteering is an excellent opportunity for a safe space for people to go and learn about what they don't know, challenge their assumptions, and begin to see themselves differently. And this cycle continues for the rest of your life. You're in this cycle right now. Some of you are like, wait, what? You may be thinking, wait, why did I sign up for this one? Because I kind of know everything that's being said. That could be a disorienting dilemma. Others are like, maybe, wait, it doesn't count that I have a Black friend? And you're working through this all the time, this mental model of making sense. It's the sense-making process. So in the in the end, we're looking to create for companies, and companies all need to do this. You can have somebody come in and lecture on an HR basis on what critical race theory is, on what intersectionality is, on what unconscious bias is, a bit like what Starbucks did when they closed down all their stores for half day and talked about unconscious bias. That's great. You need to do that, but it won't change anything. The only thing that changes things is an experience with your out group. You need to have that. And if companies are not offering that, and they typically don't, not intentionally anyways, companies are not offering that, it's just blah, blah, blah. The workforce of tomorrow needs experiential learning where we can have an immersive experience. We can have the disorienting dilemma, challenge our assumptions, learn new ways of thinking, test those out, and do it again, strengthen new pathways.
So we, to that end, experience is critical. We've talked about lived experience. We've talked about mapping, encoding these through repeated experiences. Chris talking about the path across the grass. It's always one I think about when I look at my grass and realize that I take the shortcut over to my neighbor's, which he hates the fact that we've been walking that path. Just walk down the driveway, walk up, and then I don't. But I've got this well-worn path to my neighbor's, and experience is crucial to this process as well. And so the one and done, to Chris's point, is not going to work. It's going to be a fine event. It's not without any benefit, but it's not going to shift. And so what we talk about in terms of culture shift and allyship, avenues for allyship, is when we're moving not just who we are in terms of our tourist traveler guide experience, but we're actually starting to dismantle. We're using our position as a guide to start to dismantle some of these barriers. In order to do that, it is experience. Keep going back, consistent exposure to the issues, to the conversation, to the community. Keep being changed by it. You can't possibly know everything that you needed to know in the first visit. And then you need space to have these kind of conversations, this rational dialogue. For us, when we talk about this work, we actually ask groups to frame up for themselves a brief and a debrief. Before you're having an event, make sure you tell people what they're likely to experience. When I walked in the Sunday supper the first time, I had no idea. When I was processing it, it took us some time to start to map out this journey. Those practical steps, if you're involved in employing and volunteering, it is those creating those opportunities for other people, at least once a quarter, to come on out, more than once and done. It's going to be uncomfortable. Start to prepare folks again for what it's going to feel like to show up there. Again, you're going to resist anything without groups. You're hardwired to do that. Your affinity bias will kick in. It'll feel scary, and you'll slowly break down those. And then remind that there is a privilege to being a volunteer and hanging out in these kind of spaces, not just for yourself, but the opportunity to be a part of community. This is not about fixing. This is not about making things better. But this is about making sure that people are being heard and connected on a human level.
Perfect. Okay, so we got one question from Allison that I want to address. If you want to know more about Realize Worth or our work, there are lots of links. We're going to give this. Sarah, I think we're providing you this deck to share afterwards, but I also put in the slide a little bit of an article with a recording of this conversation that I did with Engage for Good a little while ago. It didn't have Jake's brilliant insights, is it? So it's not as good, but it's something. And then there's more coming up. So before we get to this, you can read this. This is our outro slide as we wrap up here in 1 minute.
Chris, you have a question from Allison. Oh, perfect.
Yeah. I mentioned worldview. How can companies centered in North America best encourage allyship in a nuanced way for employees globally? Okay, so encourage the principle, but stay out of the way of the practical, what that means, right? So I would find an ally in allyship. We have impact councils in different parts of the world, say the UAE. One of the problems with the UAE is when the monarch, it's an absolute monarchy, says, we're going to have the year of, they didn't call it inclusion, they call it tolerance. Couldn't quite get to inclusion, but they were going to tolerate other people. fine. A lot of people said, ah, that's garbage. I was like, it's a step. How can we exploit it? So you find some folks in the region who could work with you to contextualize the principles. That's what I would say, Allison. But to do that preemptively, you kind of have to have that network, that hub and spoke network of people you can reach out to. So thanks for joining us for this breakout session. You can head back to Swipe Card to enjoy DJ Lady Ryan and the closing plenary, which kicks off at 12. Don't miss View Lee, sorry, founder of Nonprofit AF, which I assume is an unsayable word, and Fatima Angeles from Levi Strauss for a one-on-one conversation. And then everything in that third bullet, you want to do that as well. I'm just conscious of the time. So let me give it back. Sarah, anything else that we should touch base on before everybody heads out to the next great sessions or a bio break in between? Listen, I want to thank everybody for blowing up the chat. There are going to be multiple iPads coming from the Corporate Philanthropy Institute session here online. So watch for those. They'll be arriving in the mail in the next month. And Judy, thank you so much for being the first person to be on video. You're our leader today.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I learned
Paul.
something today. I didn't have time to put on my makeup and everything else. And I had so much fun being on video. I don't care.
There you go.
Well, you must have a great filter on because you look fantastic. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for being in the chat. Thank you for all the thanks in the chat. Have a great remainder of the day. Thanks
folks.
for having us. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.